Welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We'll give this another minute before we go ahead and start with this month's webinar series. I hope you all are enjoying the summer wherever you are. Maybe it's winter where you are calling from. Who knows, right? But in interest of time, let's go ahead and start. I welcome you. I say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone from around the world. Welcome to this fireside chat here with Dr. Gloria Mark. This is part of our monthly free webinar series where we have conversations and interview with, so I'm gonna go back one slide, Amy, and we're interviewing amazing researchers from around the world that all work in the field of digital wellness and digital well-being, digital flourishing. My name is Sophie Bowles, and I'm a positive media psychologist. I'm working as a director of research here at the Digital Wellness Institute, but I'm also an associate professor at Chapman University, which is in Orange, California, and that's where I am calling in from. Today, we are super excited to have and welcome Dr. Gloria Mark for our monthly free educational event, talking about her recent book release, Attention Span, a groundbreaking way to restore balance, happiness, and productivity. Gloria Mark is a Chancellor Professor of Informatics at the University of California, Irvine, so basically around the corner of where I'm located. She received her PhD from Columbia University in psychology and studies the impact of digital media on people's lives. She takes a deep dive in examining multitasking, interruptions, and mood with the use of digital devices. She has published over 200 articles, has been recognized as a top leader in the field of human-computer interaction, and has presented her work at various conferences, including South by Southwest and the Aspen Ideas Festival, and her research has appeared in popular media as well, such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, The Atlantic, BBC, and many others. So today she's chatting with us about her new book, Attention Span, which explores how to reframe the singular goal of just maximizing our productivity to instead also achieve a broader goal of how to live with and use our technologies and maintain a healthy psychological balance while being productive along the way. Based on decades of original research, where Dr. Mark studied technology use in people's real-world environments, this book not only presents the science of exactly how short our attention spans have become, how much we're interrupted and how much stress that causes us, but also how we can gain control of our attention and achieve well-being. We will give Dr. Mark the floor to provide us with an introduction into her work and her book, and then we'll chat about her research and all the amazing findings she explored in her book for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then leave the last part of the webinar for questions from you, the audience. We may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we'll try our best. And so you're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A chat box here as we go along, and then we will be answering those questions in a chronological order or as we see them fitting into the bigger, larger conversation. So without further ado, Dr. Gloria Mark, if you want to kick us off and give us a little bit of an introduction into your work.
Thank you so much, Sophia and Amy, for inviting me. Hello, everybody in the webinar. It's really so nice to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with you. So, yeah, I'm just going to talk informally about what I've been doing over the last 30 years of studying human behavior and our devices. The research started based on my own experience. So, I had been living and working in Germany for a number of years, and I moved back to the US in the year 2000. Some of you may recall the year 2000, or you've read about it. This was the year that the bubble burst in the dot-com industry. And so people were taking sort of another look about where technology was going, and a lot of people were looking for different jobs. I happened to be starting a new job in academia at University of California, Irvine. The digital age was still relatively new, and we didn't have smartphones yet, but we certainly had computers. And one of the things I noticed when I started academia was that I was just becoming more and more glued to my computer, and it was very hard for me to pull away. At the same time that I was spending so much time on the computer, I also found my attention being jerked around from project to project, from application to application to email. I just found it very hard to pay attention to any one particular thing. I started talking to other people, and other people started reporting similar things. And then I realized, well, how widespread is this? Is it just me and my colleagues, or is it just, on a much wider level? So being in academia, being a psychologist, I discovered that I could really study this empirically, and I could approach this as a scientist and find out to what extent are people really distracted on their devices. The answer is a lot. When I started tracking attention on screens, this was starting in 2003. First study was published in 2004. We found people's attention on any screen, and at that time it was just computers. It averaged 2.5 minutes before people switched. This astounded me. I thought 2.5 minutes, that's so short. I thought it would be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But I've been tracking attention over the years, and I want to emphasize that I use empirical methods. I do not ask people to self-report how much time did you spend. Why? Because people are pretty bad at estimating time. People are just notoriously bad at estimating time. If you're enjoying an activity, you will underestimate the amount of time you spent on it. If you find something to be boring, you're going to overestimate the time. It's going to seem like it's a lot longer. So back in 2003, we actually followed people with stopwatches. We clicked a stopwatch every time people changed their screens. And we also looked at activities off screen as well. But then computer logging techniques became developed, and around 2011, we started using those so we could see how often people switched screens. And the screen that's in the foreground is a pretty good proxy for how long people's attention is on any particular thing. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. 2011, we found attention dropped to an average of about, I think it was about 65 seconds. And then in the last 5-6 years, attention has averaged about 47 seconds on a screen. So what's happening? What's going on? This confirms our intuitions. It confirms what most people think. And in fact, if you've been following any of the trends that have been going on with TikTok, you'll see that people are doing things to speed up videos, and they're placing videos side by side to create an uber stimulation for people. When people listen to audiobooks, they tend to listen to them at faster speeds. People claim to help them pay attention. So, we're seeing a widespread phenomenon, and, it started well over 20 years ago, and we're seeing that it's really a challenge for people to pay attention. There's a lot of competition for the limited real estate in our minds, right? And people have a limit to how much information they can process. So let me switch over and talk a little bit about the psychology of this. So, imagine that you have a tank inside of your mind, and this tank is the amount of cognitive resources you have available. Think of it as your attentional capacity. There's things you do during the day that drain your tank, and there's things that you do that replenish your tank. So you start off with you start your day with a great night's sleep. Actually last night I did not have such a great sleep, so I'm not starting my day with, full tank here, but some days I do. And then you're really ready to put in a hard day. But sometimes we start our days like I'm doing today. Things we do during the day drain us. And one of the most important reasons for why our attention is drained is when we multitask. Multitask is not what you think it is. It's not that you're doing two things in parallel at the same time, because it's not humanly possible to do that unless one of those activities is automatic. And an example of automatic activity is walking, or when you're driving and you're on autopilot. Okay, so when you're driving, you can talk to a passenger next to you, because talking to the passenger involves conscious processing, and it involves using cognitive resources. But when you're driving, it's on autopilot, it's easy, it's not draining you at all. But let me switch over to the case. Imagine you're in a Zoom meeting, and then all of a sudden you're trying to switch into your email, and you switch back to the Zoom meeting. And it's a Zoom meeting where you have to participate, right? It's not just, you're not just listening, but you have to really, contribute to it. It's just not possible. You can't do your email and be present in this meeting at the same time. And that drains our cognitive resources. It drains our attentional capacity. And if you want to have your capacity drained really fast, then you would multitask a lot. And switching our attention every 47 seconds on average, it's a lot of attention switching. It's a lot of fast switching. And remember, it's on average. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. Sometimes you're switching back and forth like crazy. The midpoint of our observations in recent years is 47 seconds. For those of you who have some familiarity with statistics, that's called the median. That means that half of all of our observations showed people's attention on screens to be less than 40 seconds. And, half of them were longer than 40 seconds. But just the idea that half of our observations on screens, and that includes smartphones, tablets, computers, the fact that it's half or less than 40 seconds, that's quite phenomenal. So, people's typical days are characterized by having very short attention spans. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about what's happening. Why are our attention spans so short? Well, a lot of people put the blame solely on algorithms, tech companies, and algorithms that are designed to capture our attention. And that's true. They do, right? We are, in a sense, very susceptible to algorithms, but it's not the only reason, right? It's one reason. And of course, you can turn off notifications. You can turn off ads, use ad blockers, so that can help solve that problem. But there's other reasons too for what makes us so susceptible to being distracted. So let's talk about some of these other reasons. So a little known reason that maybe people haven't thought about is that the way the internet has been designed, it's been designed to optimize our distraction. It wasn't the original intent, but that's a consequence. And some of you know a little bit about the history of the internet and might know the name Vannevar Bush. He was an engineer, and back in 1945, he came up with this idea of a better way to organize information than what the Dewey Decimal System was using. What is the Dewey Decimal System? When you go to a library, that's how books are organized, right? That's the way information is typically organized. Vannevar Bush, he ran the U.S. Office of Scientific, I think it was called the Office of Scientific Production. It was around 1945. And he said, no, let's design information. Let's organize it for how people actually think. How do people think? They think in terms of associations. So if I say cat, you think of dog. We make an association. If I say computer, you make an association with internet or smartphone. So we're always constantly thinking in terms of associations. And so Vannevar Bush, he was a very smart engineer, came up with this design to organize information in terms of connections to each other. And a lot of people built on this idea. There's, Tim Berners-Lee and Ted Nelson and many other people throughout history. Fast forward, and we have the internet, which is basically designed in terms of nodes, pages of information and links between that information. Now, what does that have to do with distraction? Maybe you can guess this, but our minds are organized in terms of a semantic network of information. So we think in terms of concepts that are associated together. So you go on the internet and you're reading a Wikipedia page and all kinds of associations are brought up in your mind. And then all of a sudden you see a link that maps onto one of your associations. So you're just driven to click on that link. And then you read another page and you have all kinds of other associations in your mind. And then you see some link that maps onto one of these associations in your mind. Click on that. And before you know it, you're just joyriding through the web. Sometimes these associations, they start from within ourselves. And it turns out that people are just as likely to interrupt themselves as to be interrupted by something external to them. So, I might be working on a report and I have to do a report and it's got to be done by the end of the day. And then I have this nagging thought where I'm starting to think of, gosh, I have some leftover veggies in my refrigerator. What recipe am I going to use? And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're looking up recipes and then you link to another recipe. And what happened to that report? It's gone. Or you get bored and you decide to check news or social media. So half the time, distractions originate from within ourselves. Okay. So going back to this idea of algorithms and tech companies, yes, absolutely, they play a role, but that's not the full story, right? That's just one part of this whole picture. Personality plays a role. So some people are born lucky with a personality of having really strong self-regulation ability. I'm not one of these people. So, I tend to be very susceptible to trying out new things and switching my attention, like what initially got me started in this whole business in the first place. People who score high on a personality trait that's called neuroticism also tend to have very short attention spans, shorter than other people. Neuroticism is a personality trait that's about people tending to replay events over and over in your mind. So you had a talk with your manager and you don't feel like it went so well. So you leave that meeting and you keep replaying that event over and over and over in your mind. That's what neurotics do. And the reason why neurotics have a hard time paying attention is because they have interference from, all these other things going on in their mind. Their minds are racing. People who are conscientious, it turns out that they check email more often. Why? They don't want to let anything slip through the cracks. They want to be on top of things. And so it turns out they check email really, really often. Another reason why we're so distracted is our social natures. We're social beings, and we crave contact with other people, and we want to maintain social capital with other people, which means it's a balance of favors. So I'm going to answer your email because I want you to answer mine. I'm going to post a comment on your social media because I want you to do the same for me. So there's this exchange of social capital. There's a lot of other social relations that go on. There's power dynamics, identity. People spend a lot of time crafting their online identities. That distracts people. And one other thing, let me mention, that's behind our distractibility. And it may not be something you've thought of, but keep in mind, we live in a wider media environment. It's not just computers and phones, but we watch TV and film and music videos. And these have very short shot lengths. And it turns out that the shot length of TV and film have decreased significantly over the years, and they now average 4 seconds. So if you watch a TV show or you watch a film, on average, every 4 seconds, that shot is changing. And if you watch a music video, it's even worse. It's about every 2 seconds. And, it turns out that this kind of trend is creeping into TikTok videos, and people are they're playing TikTok videos side by side to just, get our adrenaline pumped up and make sure we pay attention. So for TV and film, I can't say that that's causing us to have short attention spans. What I will say, it's reinforcing our short attention spans. And it could be that directors and editors are crafting these short shot lengths because that's what they believe people want. That's what they believe people will pay attention to. So the point is, we're mixed up in this broader, larger media environment where a lot of things collude together to, to reinforce us in having short attention spans. So there's a lot going on. In my book, I've tried to unpack these different things because, I really want to clarify that it's not just the algorithms that are behind it, but there's so many other things going on. And we've just, we're living in this culture. And if we do want to have change, then we really need a cultural shift in what's going on. So I can start talking about solutions, or Sophia, should I pause and have people start asking questions, or do you want to ask questions?
let me jump in here. I really appreciate you outlining some of the reasons for this decreased attention span that we've seen now over the years, which is really fascinating data. And really appreciate you also honing in on, you actually measure that with objective measures and not just asking people, because yes, we know self-report can be very problematic with that. And specifically, you're outlining that it's not always the algorithm that's the main problem here, because that's very quickly obviously where the news media goes into, and we have to remember that we are social creatures and we're rather complex, and there's a lot of factors that play into this. What I'm really curious about is, you talked a lot about, again, the reasoning behind the short attention spans. What are the consequences for our lives of now these very much decreased attention spans that we have? And then how is that related to happiness?
That's a great question. So it turns out that when people are shifting their attention really fast, that's what is called multitasking, right? Shifting attention fast. There's three consequences. Number one, people make more errors. And we know this from decades of research in the laboratory, where people were given tasks where they would have one condition where they do a task, finish it, and move on to something else, and then something else. Or they were put in a condition where they had to work on things where they're switching their attention, work on this for a bit, then switch here, then go back. People make way more errors when they have to switch their attention. So that's one consequence. There was a study done with physicians, and physicians multitask a lot. They're interrupted a lot. They're distracted a lot from nurses, patients, other clinicians, lots of information. Their pagers go off. And it turns out that they made a huge number of prescribing errors when they were multitasking. And some of those errors were serious, in writing the wrong drug and writing the wrong dosage. Okay. A second consequence is that it takes longer for people to do things. So, we might think that we're doing things faster by doing multiple things at the same time, but we're actually not. And the reason is because every time you switch your attention, there's a switch cost. There's a time that it takes to reorient to this new activity. And let me give you an example. Let me use a metaphor that can help explain this. Imagine that we have a whiteboard inside of our minds. And for every task you do, we have a mental model of that task. Right? The mental model is, here's the information I need. Here's how I'm going to do this task, right? Let's say I'm writing a paper. I have this mental model about it. And then I suddenly switch and I turn to email. I have another mental model. So I have this whiteboard. Imagine you have a whiteboard inside of your mind. You're erasing the information that you conjured up in your mind for doing this task. You're erasing it and you're rewriting new information for the new task that you switch to. And then suddenly you switch to something else. You're erasing that whiteboard in your mind and writing up the new information that corresponds to the mental model of your new task. And sometimes, imagine like you go on the news and you read some horrific accident. Well, that can create interference because you read this horrifying accident and then you try to come back to work and you're still thinking about that accident. And in the same way, when we try to erase a whiteboard, sometimes it leaves residue. Sometimes we can have residue in our mind from the last task that we did, and that residue can interfere with our current task at hand. So now let me get to the third consequence, which is probably I would call it the nail in the coffin. And that is that when we switch our attention, it causes stress. And we know that it causes stress. We know that from laboratory studies. People's blood pressure has been shown to rise, both diastolic and systolic blood pressure rise when people are switching their attention rapidly like that. There's a physiological marker in the body that shows that people are stressed when they're multitasking. And from my own research, where we've looked at people in their real world activities, we've had them wear heart rate monitors, we've had them wear wearables where we can track heart rate. We correlate it with precise timestamps to see exactly what they're doing on their computers and phones. And we see a very strong correlation. The faster they're switching, the higher is their stress, as measured by something called heart rate variability. Okay, so 3 consequences on our well-being. We make more errors, takes us longer to do something, and we're more stressed. So, and those are pretty robust results. They've been studied for a long time.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And then I think obviously the stress obviously translates into our well-being. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, again, the relationship between these consequences of reduced attention span and our happiness, which is also what your book tries to balance, right? That productivity with well-being. If you want to a little bit into that before we get into practical tips.
Yeah, so we are in this culture where we're being forced to be as productive as possible. And with the whole rise in technology was developed to increase our capabilities as humans. And sorry, I just had an update appear on my screen that I had to click out of. Technology was designed to increase our capabilities as humans. And as a result, there's this cultural expectation that we're going to use our computers to be as productive as we possibly can. And in fact, there's a lot to it, right? Word processors made it easier and faster for us to type. But, as a result, people take fewer breaks. And there's also this expectation that we will produce more, that we'll spend more time producing because we can, because we have the tools to be able to do it. And I'm pushing back on this. And I want us to instead rethink this whole culture of productivity so that we put well-being first. Let's put well-being first, and then productivity will come along the way. Now, when people are happy, when they have positive well-being, they can do more. There's a theory that's called the broaden and build theory that shows that when people feel positive, they can do more. They can generate a wider amount of ideas. They have a larger repertoire of solutions for solving problems. When you feel positive, that's been shown. I mean, there have been studies where different moods are induced. So in one condition, people, a positive mood is induced. People watch films that, very happy kinds of films, and then they give them a test and find out, yes, their moods have improved. In another condition, people watch sad films and they give them a test and find their moods have kind of darkened. And they find in those conditions, when people's moods have, become more positive, they can solve problems better. They have a larger choice of things that they can do. They can brainstorm. They're more creative. So there's so many positive things that can come out of that. But if we're pushing ourselves to try to do as much as we can, and especially if we don't take breaks, we get ourselves stressed and we get into the cycle of, not being able to perform as well as we can. And, another thing is that to really perform well, we need to have a full tank of cognitive resources, of attentional capacity. And this is so precious, and we can't waste it, right? When we're multitasking, that tank is just dripping away from mental resources. But we need to preserve that tank so that we can do more. When we work too long without taking a break, we get ourselves exhausted. Those mental resources drain. And it turns out we become even more susceptible to distractions because we don't have, there's a part in our mind called executive function. And our executive function just can't operate the way it's supposed to. It can't. And the executive function is what keeps us on track and helps us focus. And you need fuel for executive function to operate. And that fuel is our cognitive resources. So we get ourselves into this cycle. You imagine a cycle of getting exhausted, more susceptible to distraction. We respond to the distractions, attention shifts, and we get more exhausted. So it just keeps cycling, and we have to break out of that cycle.
Yeah, amazing. And I love you're referring to taking breaks. Can you share what the ideal break looks like? Because I think we all have a different conception of, oh yeah, I'm taking a break from work, but that break from work may not necessarily actually be productive to take a break for our brain, because it might include, again, more screen time. And there's some screen time that actually can also help recovery. But if you want to share a little bit on what's the ideal break to really get those executive functions up to speed again.
Yeah. So it's really important to be aware, to become self-aware of your own level of capacity. And if you start feeling that you're starting to drain, it's really important at that point to step back and take a break. Don't make the mistake I did. I used to work myself through to exhaustion, and that's where you get burned out. And then it becomes really hard to recover. So as soon as you start feeling tired, exhausted, mentally fatigued, step back, take a break. The best break of all is to go outside. We know that 20 minutes being in nature is the most restorative for our cognitive resources. We did a study where we had people take a walk outside for 20 minutes, and we found that compared to other people who did something else during that 20-minute time, people were able to have what's called greater divergent thinking, which means it's brainstorming. They could be more creative. They could come up with more and different ideas because they were restored, right? They had the cognitive resources to come up with other ideas. So sometimes I realize it's not possible to go outside and take a break. And as we're speaking right now, I realize in many parts of the country, it's pretty hot, and it's not possible to just go outside and take a break. We're lucky here in California. It's, the weather is pretty nice, but if you can't go outside, try to move around, right? Try to get up, walk around, move around, make sure that you're focusing on something at a distance as opposed to just looking at the screen. It's really important. And if you can't just move around, it's also okay to just do some kind of mindless activity, what I call rote activity. And this is something that's easy, that's engaging, that's calming. Some people report doing knitting One guy who I spoke to said he has this screen set up in his office and he just likes to throw this ball, bounces off the screen. We find that when people do this kind of rote activity, it actually makes them happiest. They're happier than when they're working on focused work. Why? Because if you're working on focused work, it's stressful, right? You're using up your cognitive resources. You're, trying to focus. Maybe you have a deadline. This allows you to just kind of pull away and just, take a break, but you're doing something engaging. And it's okay also to play a simple game. If it's engaging and relaxing for you, but you don't want to get trapped in doing that game. So set a timer or do whatever it takes to make sure you're not going to go into a rabbit hole. So in other words, be strategic. If you are going to, do something on your phone, but have an interaction with another person. Social interaction can be very refreshing. There's so many ways to take a break, and make sure that you really take significant breaks away from work. You don't want to take a break and do email. That's not a break, right? We know that email stresses people. We know that empirically, and we know that email puts people in a bad mood. That's a very robust result.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you're pointing that out, because sometimes it's important for us to hear email is not a break. Let's just keep it at that. It's not a break. It's actually still work, and it's definitely not helping with recovery. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you maybe say 2 or 3 more practical tips related to helping with the problem of the decreased attention span? Basically, how can we be going against that trend that you found in the data?
Sure. So during the pandemic, my university offered a course on mindfulness-based stress reduction. I'm sure many people in the audience are familiar with mindfulness. Many people might practice it. What I love about mindfulness is that it's designed to keep our attention in the present. So I take that basic idea, keeping our attention in the present, and I realize that it can apply to what we do when we're on our computers and phones. And that is what I call practicing meta awareness, which is an awareness of what we're doing as it's unfolding. And this awareness includes understanding when we're being distracted. And you can do this by probing yourself and learning to recognize when you're being distracted. And you pause and you reflect on the reasons why you're distracted. And that's what I do. It's helped me tremendously. Most of the time I'm distracted because I'm bored or because I'm procrastinating. And so then I reflect on that. Why am I bored? What is it that's not interesting? What can I do to help myself work a little bit longer before I take a significant break? Sometimes I'm distracted because I'm just tired, in which case it's a signal that I need to pull back and take a break. So practicing meta awareness is about probing yourself, learning to recognize these behaviors in you for when you feel distracted and reflecting on them and coming up with a plan. And, a plan that I use is, okay, I'm going to work 30 more minutes and then I'm going to stop and take a really nice long break. And that's good, motivation for me to continue. So, and let me say that meta awareness might be a little bit hard in the beginning, but if you practice it for a while, it becomes second nature. And it's like a muscle. You're developing this mental muscle, and then it's just really quite natural. Another thing we can do is to practice forethought. And forethought is imagining how your current actions will affect your future self. And this is also about awareness of when you're about to do something like go on social media. And if you're a person and you know you can easily spend half an hour on social media or watching YouTube videos, visualize what you want your end of the day to look like. That's your future self. And at 7 p.m., I want to feel fulfilled and I want to feel rewarded and I want to be relaxed. That's what I want my future self to be. And so that's enough to stop me in my tracks from doing something that's going to distract me. So practicing forethought is really important. And then let me mention one other thing, and that's the idea that attention is goal directed. So we pay attention according to what our goals are. If my goal is to finish a report, that's where I pay attention. If my goal is, I want to see what my friends are up to, I'll go to social media. If my goal is what's happening in the news, I'll go to the news. If my goal is relieving boredom, maybe I'll go to social media. So consider what your goals are. And if you really want to accomplish something like finishing a report or writing a paper or getting through your emails, write that down as a goal. Because what we know, we've done research and we found that when people are asked to report their goals at the beginning of the day, right? And there's two kinds of goals. There's a task goal. What do you want to accomplish today? And there's an emotional goal. How do you want to feel today? And emotional goals are just as important as task goals. And we found in a study that we did where people were asked these two questions at the beginning of the day, people stuck to their goals longer, right? Because the goals were put in the forefront of their mind and it directed their attention. However, we also discovered that goals can slip very easily. And goals are dynamic, they can slip away. And so it's so important that you write down goals so that you can continually be reminded of what your goals are. And you can, have your goals on your smartphone, you can have them on a Post-it note. If you're good at self-reminding, you can keep reminding yourself, but the goals will direct our attention and help keep us on track.
Thank you. I want to get to some of the questions here in the Q&A and actually start with the last one, which maybe you already answered a little bit with the last two tips of forethought and having task goals and emotional goals set up. But one of the attendees asks, what is your advice for folks who maybe are in an employment position where taking breaks is really strict or not applicable?
Yeah, that's problematic because the breaks are imposed on people in a way that might not be natural for people. And it's not a good thing. So, each individual has their own rhythm of attention. Every person has their own time for peak attention and time when they're in a valley, right? And that corresponds to the ebb and flow of our cognitive resources. And when your resources start draining, you want to take a break before they get rock bottom. But if you're in an employment position where you have prescribed breaks, you can't take a break until this amount of time, well, that's not good. And I would put together a memo for your management to explain that you will be a lot more productive if you can take breaks at a time for when you're exhausted, so that you can be replenished, because you will do your best So you have to make a case. In fact, I would love for management to become more aware of well-being of employees and to understand that people need to design their days for what suits them the best. And it will be a payoff back to managers, a payoff to the organization, because people will perform better than if they're working in a system where you have prescribed breaks. Because, if the prescribed breaks are, you're already exhausted and you have another 45 minutes before a break, you're not going to be productive in that time. So I would make a case to your organization. I would present empirical results and show them that, people will produce more if they can take breaks at a time that works for them personally.
Thank you. Yes. Hard problem to tackle. Let me get to another question here from Teresa. Wow. How do people with ADHD factor into these concepts? And so assuming the attention concept.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that all of these techniques can work for people with ADHD. This notion of meta awareness, being more self-aware of when you're being distracted. I have a colleague with ADHD, and he told me that this technique really helped him a lot. It's about being in control, right? So being in control, making sure you take significant breaks so that you have the resources so that you can be in control. And, the technique of practicing forethought, right? Every time you have this urge to jump around and view something, think about where you want to be at the end of the day. And, keeping goals it's a shield against distractions. And so a person with ADHD might need to be a little bit more proactive in terms of keeping goals in mind, and might have to do a little bit more work in terms of reminding themselves of goals. It's really important. And if you step back and take a break, set a timer if you need to make sure that you can come back. You're not going to go down a rabbit hole during a break. But I hear you. It's certainly a challenge when a person has ADHD.
Thank you. Another question related to the breaks. Actually, I'm going to go to that one again. So jumping back, there's another question of Lita Ham, who asks, what about breaks for so many essential workers who really have to be on with people, not computers, such as healthcare, hospitality, retail, factories, etc., transportation, first responders? And obviously you talked about, talking to the management, trying to change the culture of giving more autonomy to people when they want to have breaks. But do you have any other tips for people within those working areas?
Yeah, we absolutely need a cultural shift so that people do not get burned out. And, the best way to make a case for this is you give statistics and you show evidence that people can get burned out. And it actually costs the company more when people are absent, and this loss of what's called presenteeism. A loss of presenteeism means you're physically at the workplace, but you're not doing your best, right? And that's a cost to the company. But if people can take breaks and refresh, they can actually be more productive for the company. It's a long cultural shift, and it's going to be hard work. But we need to do it, and we need to do it at a collective level. I don't think any individual is going to be able to just pull back on themselves, they'll get penalized. So we need to think collectively how organizations can think about that for people. And there are organizations that are doing that. For example, the German company Allianz and also Volkswagen, they have quiet time for employees so that employees can choose when to take breaks. They won't have to answer electronic communications because that's also very stressful. And that drives work, right? To always have to respond to emails. And of course, people are asking you for information. Email it's a symbol of work, right? So if we can have quiet time from email and Slack and phone calls and messaging, electronic communications, that can also help people relax.
Thank you. Yeah, Gwyneth really as asking is really making also the point that it's really hard to change this culture, talking with corporates and high level leaders within organizations where statistics may not be just sufficient enough. And you now mentioned there are organizations that are even really large. Volkswagen Allianz, they're really big, and somehow they made it happen. So it's almost looking at a template of how were they able to convince the leader board to change the culture in that way. But I do want to get to some other questions here, maybe one more. What evidence-based backed actions can we take to counteract the downward trend in attention spans?
So I talked about some of them, practicing meta-awareness on the individual level, forethought, keeping goals in mind, having people design their own days instead of thinking about a schedule. It's 11 o'clock, I'm going to accomplish this by noon, I'm going to accomplish this. Instead, thinking about your own personal rhythm of attention, because people have individual rhythms. If you're a morning person, your attention will peak earlier in the day. If you're a late type person, your attention will peak later in the day. That is evidence-based. We know that it corresponds to what's called people's chronotypes, if you're an early type or a late type, and having breaks be designed around people's personal rhythms. Now, this may not work in all companies, especially if, companies need to have some kind of regulated break for everyone. For example, if someone's a line worker, everyone needs to take a break at the same time, but maybe there can be solutions where people can rotate breaks so that it can correspond more to individuals. But I also believe we need collective solutions. And there's a societal solution that I advocate, and that's right to disconnect laws. And these are laws, they're in France, there's the El Khomri law, in Ontario, Canada, in Ireland, there's policy where workers are not penalized if they don't answer electronic communications after work hours. We know that it's so important for people to psychologically detach from work. That's extremely important. When you leave work, you need to psychologically detach. That helps you replenish. And it also helps you psychologically reattach to work the next day. So it really has a benefit. But, people tend to not turn off from work. They're always on email. They're on Slack, they're on text, they're answering phone calls because they know if they don't do it, they're going to be penalized. Let's talk about laws so that nobody is penalized. And that people really have the right, it really is a human right to be able to disconnect, to be able to replenish. So it's extremely important.
Thank you. Yes, very much appreciated. for that as well. And unfortunately, we're already out of time. It goes quickly. It goes really by so quickly. So I want to officially thank Dr. Gloria Mark. I apologize for all the questions that we didn't get to. I want to kick it over for one more second here to our CEO of the Digital Wellness Institute to just let us know about the next fireside chat that is coming up here as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you, Sophie. And I'm so excited about this monthly series, the opportunity to extend our learning and really deepen our interventions that we're offering to the world for digital wellness. Our next opportunity is coming up on August 9th with Dr. Adrienne Meyer. Hope you'll mark your calendar now. You'll get an invite from us as well. But that'll be a wonderful opportunity to hear about whether or not social media can make us happy or whether it's just going to make us unhappy. So come with your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. We look forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.